name is Nicole Fuller. We're going to be talking about making memories in the kitchen, trying to get your kids into the kitchen, how it's important to get them in the kitchen, the reasons why we might want to do it, and just some little tips along the way, age appropriate things that your child can do in the kitchen depending on their age range, and as well as some recipes that I found on kind of a healthier spin on some traditional recipes. So just a little bit about me. I've been a dietitian, gosh, for a very long time, over 20 years, which is scary. I've worked in many different areas of nutrition, long-term care, acute care, dialysis. I'm working with maternity population now, doing outpatient and community programs like this one. I myself have 3 children. I have 3 boys, 3 under 15, they're here and pictured, 15-year-old, 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So I've likely been where you are. And as a matter of fact, my middle child there, the one pictured in the middle, is a very picky eater. So I run the gamut. Let me see how I can get, okay, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. So how to get your kids in the kitchen. I came across or came up with some ways to get them in the kitchen, some reasons why we want to get them in the kitchen, and some things reasons you might have not even thought of why kids should be getting into the kitchen. And keep in mind, some of the things I'm talking about might not apply to younger kids. They might apply to more older kids, or some things might apply to older kids and not younger kids. So you kind of have to figure out how to use the information for the age that your children are, if that makes sense. And as Danielle said, if you have something to add to the program, put it in the chat box. We can bring it up at the end of the presentation. So number one of the reasons why you might want to get your kids in the kitchen now is because obviously it gets them interested in food. It gets them interested with the idea of cooking, getting kids involved in the creating their meals. They are more likely to eat their meals. And this is actually a good idea, especially for those of us that have had picky eaters. It doesn't necessarily mean they are going to try it right away if they are picky, but it will get them interested. Believe me, I've been doing this for 12 years now with my picky eater. I've gotten him in the kitchen, and he's interested in wanting to bake things and make things, which gets him interested in the concept. It doesn't always mean he's going to try it, but he's definitely started to try more things. So it is important, and getting them in the kitchen at a young age and getting them interested in the food. You can talk about, why you're using this ingredient or that ingredient, and gets them involved in the process. Another reason, which you may not even think of why you should try and get your kids in the kitchen, is because it can help them build their self-confidence and develop life skills. And what do I mean by this? So getting kids in the kitchen gives them the opportunity to be involved in the process of starting a meal and completing a meal, or starting a baked good and completing whatever it is you're making. So it can provide them with a feeling of accomplishment, like, hey, look at this. It was written on paper. We got all this stuff together and we completed it. Even if they're not totally successful at it, you might have an egg on the ground or on the counter, or some shell in the thing, whatever the recipe is, or if they're, mashing potatoes or making a personal pizza, even if it doesn't look pretty, they're still involved in the process from start to finish. I mean, maybe they've wandered off in the middle, but at least, they're accomplishing something which can boost their self-confidence. And letting them know at the end, thank you so much. Thank you for your help. They've accomplished this goal. Okay, so it can actually build their self-confidence and develop some skills along the way. Another reason which kind of goes back to number one. Getting them in the kitchen helps them build or start to help build healthy eating habits. And this also kind of requires us as parents to help them too. You get them in the kitchen, you start talking about specific foods, you start talking about specific ingredients you might need, be using. This can lead into why we should be choosing different foods, or, it doesn't mean you have to have a master's degree in nutrition. We all kind of know why we should be eating certain things, right? Maybe it's white flour versus whole wheat flour, and why we should maybe do half of white flour, half of whole wheat, or, substituting Greek yogurt for sour cream. I mean, that might be a little advanced for some children, but again, it creates that idea of why we want to build healthy eating habits. And then as your kids get older, you can help them, or they might help you build a grocery list, or you can go to the grocery store. It even gets outside the kitchen where they learn about, foods, purchasing healthier food options. Okay. Another thing, quality time with family. Okay. Nowadays, I know, like, between school, work, children's activities, just day-to-day life, a lot of times we're having to build in quality time with our kids and with our family. So this is a time, believe it or not, listen, I get it. I have 3 kids of my own. Like I said, it was not always a time I looked forward to getting them in the kitchen when I wasn't planning on it, because there's going to be a mess, they're going to want to do all of the things. But if you just look at it as an opportunity to spend time together, it kind of can adjust your mind frame, right? Another great reason to get kids in the kitchen, you don't think about this, but it can help build math skills and reading skills, as well as comprehension, right? Just about I don't know a recipe out there that does not use some sort of math skills, whether it's just taking out measuring spoons. Like, I thought of this, you can take out the measuring spoons and teach them the difference between, the measurements. It involves adding, or even fractions as they get older, a half cup, 3/4 cup. You can take out the cup measurements and teach them about that. And then reading skills. Obviously, every recipe out there that you have to read the recipe. Again, this might be, towards older kids. Oh, and going back to math skills, even like, when they're real little, they're learning to count. It could be like, how many eggs do we need? Oh, we need 2 eggs. So here's 1 egg, here's 2 eggs. And then the reading, you read the recipe, but they also have to comprehend, how do we get, they could read the recipe, but to put the recipe and translate it into an actual dish, they have to comprehend how that all goes together. And then last but not least, learning family traditions. I kind of wish my mother did this with me. She was born and raised in Germany. It's a little too late now, but if she had brought me into the kitchen earlier to learn some, family recipes, my husband is lucky enough that his grandmother, who actually was born in Germany, taught him some recipes. But getting your kids in the kitchen to learn some of those, family traditions or family dishes, it's a great opportunity at this time. So I kind of broke it down into like 3 age group ranges, what they can do in the kitchen. And like I said, you kind of have to weed this out for specific to your own child. This is for 2 to 4-year-olds. Some 2-year-olds can do this. Some can do it when they're 4. So these are just ideas. Things like wiping down tables or counters or your workspace, not like a harsh chemical, maybe like a water vinegar thing before you start preparing. They can clean the produce, you might have to clean it a little bit afterwards, but get the idea of putting it under water and rinsing it off. If you have, salad greens and you don't need to cut them up, they can tear the greens and put them in a bowl for you. They can, carry ingredients from one place to the next. So if you need the flour, they can get the flour and put it on the table. little things, but to them, it might seem like a great accomplishment, right? They could knead and shape the dough, or, just mix the dough in their hands. Actually, they can mix ingredients with their spoons and hands as well. They can throw things out in the garbage. It's just the experience of even doing little things, whether it's, you measure out the ingredient and you tell them, oh, pour it in the bowl, or, the teaspoon, or whatever it is. They get so excited about the smallest little things. So again, it's also that quality time together, and they're learning as they're doing it. So these are ideas for 2 to 4 year olds. So what about 5 to 7 year olds? And this is my picky eater guy, my middle child. I don't know how old he was, probably somewhere between 5 and 7 at this time. But what can some 5 to 7 year olds do? Well, they could peel oranges, bananas, or eggs. The cooked eggs. They can crack eggs. Now you might want to wait until they're a little older, but you can try to get them cracking. You might want to, hold their hands as they do it, but it's a great way to get them introduced to cracking eggs. You can have them start to learn measuring ingredients, get the measuring spoons out, and be prepared for mess. It's going to happen. If you haven't gotten your kids in the kitchen yet, it's going to be messy. You can have them start to learn how to use a beater, or even if it's just a handheld whisk. I'm not sure which one is actually more, not dangerous, but messier. If you're not worried about mess, that is even better. They can also start to mash soft foods like fruit or cauliflower, if you're doing the mashed cauliflower, potatoes, turnips, those types of things. You can get them to mash. There's also so many gadgets out there. If you go to any like Bed Bath Beyond in the kitchen section, I don't know if you can see on the counter here, we have this. So to cut apples, it's this little gadget here, and you hold the handles and you push down, and the peel comes off, and it's cut into, I believe, 8 pieces. So something like that a 5 to 7 year old could do. If you have herbs, and you can get some kids scissors, and they can cut up the herbs for you. Now, when it comes to 8 to 11 year olds, what could they do? So you might not think of these things, or you might not think that your kids are capable of doing it, but there's the best way to do it is just to try. So how can 8 to 11 year olds get involved? Well, they can start to peel vegetables. And you know what? This is actually great, because especially around the holiday times, when we're doing so much in the kitchen, if you start your kids at a young age helping in the kitchen, by the time they're 8 to 11, they can start help with some of the prep work, around Thanksgiving or the other holidays coming up. So peeling vegetables, carrots, potatoes, turnip, sweet potatoes, anything. Whisking using a regular whisk or the beater. At this point, by this age, they should be able to do that. Opening cans. You have just a can opener, or nowadays a lot of them have the sort of pop top. They can open cans for you, pour things out. Between 8 and 11, they can start to read recipes. So again, the reading and the comprehension, following the step-by-step recipe. Sometime some kids by the age 11 can make an entire recipe by themselves, even if it's like boxed brownies or boxed pancakes. They can help find recipes online that they might want to try. They can even, and if they find recipes, they could start putting the grocery list together. And at this age, you can start to introduce them to cutting vegetables, although I would definitely be there while they're trying to do that. And that leads into my next topic, which is kitchen safety. Okay, so number one, you do want to teach them about hygiene and food safety. So, if you're doing anything with any kind of meat or eggs, how to handle cleaning up afterwards and preparing it beforehand, and keeping, any kind of raw meat, fish, poultry away from your produce. We also want to teach them about hand washing and how to properly wash their hands. Again, handling the raw foods. When it comes to temperatures and heat and taking things out of the oven, using oven mitts or pot holders, keeping the handles of any kind of saucepans turned in and not out, using the food thermometer to check the temperature of meat, to make sure it's cooked properly. And then the best part, as they get older, you teaching them about cleaning up after yourself. So this is great, and they can learn how to help clean in the kitchen after they've helped you. It's great. All right, so I also wanted to talk about, we're making memories in the kitchen, but sometimes as parents, we want to, and especially as a dietitian, I want to figure out how can I make some recipes a little bit healthier. And you kind of have to decide, or sometimes it's trial and error, substituting things and seeing how the recipe turns out. Or read the reviews. If you find a recipe online and it says like, absolutely not, this tastes like cardboard, you might not want to go that far. Or instead of modifying a bunch of items in a recipe, just pick one or two. So a lot of times you can use low fat or fat-free plain Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. So like in dips and stuff like that, that's something that I know a lot of people do. So like if you're making a ranch dip, you could use the plain Greek yogurt and use the ranch seasoning instead of using sour cream. If you're having to do something with chicken, and it's calling for dark meat, you can choose white meat over the dark meat. It'll lower the calories and the fat. When you're baking, if it calls for oil or butter, a lot of times you can substitute half of that with unsweetened applesauce. So if it's a cup of oil in the recipe, you use half a cup of oil and half a cup of applesauce, or you could also do another kind of mashed or pureed fruit like pumpkin or banana. When it comes to using broths, like chicken broth, beef broth, a lot of times they will have a low sodium or fat-free, or both low sodium fat-free options. So choosing that. Plain Greek yogurt you can use to replace half of the mayo in some salads. So like if you have a chicken salad or tuna salad, you can use, and it says like a half a cup of mayo, use a quarter cup mayo, quarter cup plain Greek yogurt. The same thing you could do with coleslaw, or you could just do something with a vinegar-based salad instead. There are so many tips for modifying recipes. So if you need a copy of these at all, you at the end, or if you want to request any, if it's going too fast and you can't write them down, you could just let Danielle or I know and we can get these to you. If you're doing pies or anything like that, a lot of the canned pies are filled with lots of added sugar. So you think about, modifying it by using fresh or frozen fruit and adding the amount of sugar you want. Speaking of sugar, when you're doing a recipe, you can cut back. So say it's saying 1 cup of sugar, reduce it by 1/3 and put 2/3 of a cup of sugar in it. A lot of times you can also substitute, not completely the sugar out, but adding spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, or vanilla extract will kind of give you the flavor or the additional sweetness that you're looking for. Another idea, using whole wheat pasta instead of white pasta. Same with brown rice instead of white rice. You're getting a little bit more nutrition in, wheat, fiber and vitamins and minerals, whereas the white counterparts are lacking in that. When it comes to flour in a recipe, you can cut down a recipe by half, like instead of 1 cup of white flour, use half a cup of white flour, half a cup of whole wheat flour. Or you can specifically look for recipes that use whole wheat flour instead of white flour. But you might not want to replace it all. Again, it's kind of trial and error, and looking for recipes online that have good reviews. Cheese, if you're doing something with cheese, you could just cut down the amount of cheese or use a low fat or fat-free option. Sometimes the fat-free option doesn't always work out. So maybe just cut back a half cut it in half or even by a quarter, and you're reducing the calories and fat, making it a little bit healthier. And one more slide on modify. See, there's tons of ways to modify recipes here. Again, instead of using regular cheese, use low fat or fat free. Again, this doesn't always work out. It's trial and error, but you know, you win some, you lose some. Instead of using the regular sour cream, use low fat or non-fat. So if you didn't want to use Greek yogurt instead of sour cream, just use low fat or fat-free options. If your recipe calls for evaporated milk, try evaporated skim milk. Again, you're going to be reducing the amount of fat and the amount of calories in the recipe. And with eggs, did you know if you, instead of using a whole egg, you can use 2 egg whites instead of a whole egg? There's even ways you can make, I think it's chia or flax seeds that you can use as an egg replacement if you want to make a recipe vegan. I just can't remember the ratio for chia seeds to water that you have to use to replace the egg. So next up, so this is ways that you can modify recipes just without looking at a recipe. So if you're making a boxed brownies and I think it's a half a cup of oil or 2/3 of a cup of oil, you could reduce the oil and use unsweetened apple sauce instead, or 2 egg whites instead of 1 whole egg. Or you can find recipes that have already been modified for you. So I found a couple that looked pretty healthy and interesting to me. I found this on eatingwell.com. These are pumpkin brownies. So I will go through the ingredients, but you can either screenshot this or write it down as we talk, or you can even go to the Eating Well website and look for some things. So pumpkin brownies, you're going to use 3/4 cups whole wheat pastry flour. So this doesn't have any white flour in it to begin with. So this you wouldn't have to modify. 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. Lots of seasonings in here because it doesn't have that much sugar. So it has 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, whereas most would probably have more like 1 cup, but they're substituting using 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon. They're 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. So this would actually be really good teaching point for kids when it comes to fractions, right? Because of the halves and the 1/4 and the 1/8. You're going to also need 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Yes, I know, lots of measuring spoons there, so lots of cleaning. But then again, your kids might be at the age where they can clean the dishes. For the wet ingredients, you're going to do 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree. And this is also lower in fat, right? Because you're using the pumpkin puree instead of a lot of fat. 1 large egg, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. And if you have salted butter, I might just reduce the amount of salt you put in the recipe or eliminate the salt altogether. So 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, any kind of vegetable oil will do. So you could see how low in fat this is because it only has 2 tablespoons of the vegetable oil. 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 1/3 of a cup of mini chocolate chips. You can always increase the amount of chocolate chips if you want to like 1/2 cup. I look at recipes like, if you don't like cloves, don't have cloves, leave it out. You can, play around with things. Nothing is written in stone. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to preheat your oven. You're going to get an 8-inch square metal baking pan, and you're going to line it with parchment paper and let it hang over the edges. You're going to spray it with cooking spray. You're going to pretty much mix all of your dry ingredients except for the sugar in a medium bowl. So that's your flour, cocoa, your baking soda, salt, and all of the seasonings, or not seasonings. What is the word I'm thinking of? You know what I mean? The cinnamon, the nutmeg, and the ginger, and the cloves. Then you're going to whisk your wet ingredients together, including the sugar. So the sugar, egg, pumpkin, butter, and oil, and vanilla in a large bowl. And you're going to mix that well. Then you're going to take the dry ingredients, add it to the wet ingredients until it's just combined. And then you'll fold in the chocolate chips, pour it into the pan. You're going to bake until pretty much a toothpick comes out of the center, coming out of the center of it, coming out clean, somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes. And then let it cool on a baking rack and cut it when you're ready to try them. And if you do try this recipe, please let us know and report back how it is. I wanted to give an idea of an appetizer. Now, my kids like spinach dip. Not everyone does like spinach dip, or not all children, but this is a way to make it a little bit healthier. And I got this from ifoodreal.com. And I will say that my middle child, the picky eater, has a home ec class this year, and his home ec teacher actually made this and shared the recipe with me. So I thought, you know, if the 7th grade home ec teacher is making this, then it's got to be something some kids will eat. So you're going to start out with 2 10-ounce packages of frozen spinach, half a large onion that you're going to finely chop. You're going to need 3 cloves of garlic, two that are minced and 1 that's grated. So 1 more finely, you know, grated, and 2 that are kind of a little bit not as finely chopped. You're going to grate 1 medium carrot, and this is great because you're going to get a little extra vegetables in there with the carrot, a little bit of extra color. 2 teaspoons of oil, any kind of vegetable oil, 2 cups of low-fat plain Greek yogurt, or regular plain yogurt. Doesn't have to be Greek, but don't get the fat-free because it doesn't really work in this recipe. And then a 1/4 cup of mayo. So you could see how it's lower in fat because they're using the yogurt instead of all mayonnaise here. 1 teaspoon of salt, and then ground pepper to taste. And then to put it together, you know, you're going to want to thaw out your spinach. You could either do it in the microwave, leave it in a colander, that might take overnight. But then you want to squeeze out as much liquid as you can from that spinach once it's thawed, and put it in a bowl and set that aside. Then you're going to preheat a nonstick skillet, put the oil in, and saute the onion, the 2 minced cloves of garlic and carrot, and you're going to, you know, stir it, saute it until it's, you know, translucent. Stir it occasionally. You're going to then put that in the bowl with the spinach, adding the yogurt, the mayo, the salt, the pepper, and stir well. And then add that 1 grated garlic that you had. Add that. You can refrigerate it for a few hours to let like those flavors marry together, you know, kind of just sit there and meld together. If you don't have time, you don't have to do that. You can bake it right away, 350 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. You can also make this ahead. So if the whole family's going somewhere together, or you want to just make it, you know, for Sunday afternoon or whatever, and you don't want to make it right away, you can prepare it ahead of time and then bake it later, 350 for 15 to 20 minutes. You could serve it. You can make it healthy. You serve it with, you know, cut up vegetables, whole wheat pita chips, or brown rice crackers, something along those lines. And then last but not least, and this was from foodnetwork.com, oatmeal chocolate snack cakes. So for this, you're going to need some cooking spray, 1 cup of whole wheat pastry flour. Again, this has been modified, so you don't even have to cut any white flour in half because it's just whole wheat flour. 3/4 cups of rolled oats, which I thought this recipe was great because it was including oats in it, which is a good source of fiber and vitamins and minerals. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 6 tablespoons of unsalted melted butter, lightly cooled, like just leave it on. You can melt it in the microwave if you want to, and just cool it on the counter. 1 large egg, preferably at room temperature. 3/4 cup packed light brown sugar, and you can see they cut back the sugar because they're using unsweetened applesauce, and they're also cutting back on the fat by using the applesauce, because there's only 6 tablespoons of butter in here. And then 3/4 cup semi-sweet chocolate chips. So, and I know, don't get overwhelmed by a lot of words. Sometimes I look at a recipe and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to do that because it looks too long. It looks overwhelming, but it's really not. you're going to preheat your oven. You're going to take out a 9-inch square pan. If you don't know 9-inch square pan, improvise. Maybe you have a 13-inch pan. You probably just won't bake it as long, right? You're going to put foil on the bottom, let it hang over on the sides, spray it with cooking spray. You're going to whisk the flour, oats, pretty much you're going to whisk the dry ingredients together in a medium bowl. Then in another bowl, you're going to mix the liquid ingredients and includes the sugar in there too. So the sugar goes in with the wet ingredients, and until it's combined. You're going to mix the dry and wet ingredients just until it's barely mixed. You don't want to over mix it. Put in your chocolate chips, put the batter in the baking pan. And this is where you can get your kids to help, right? They can stir, they can whisk, they can spray the spray on the pan. They can pour the stuff into the baking pan for you and spread it around. Then you're going to put it in the oven until it comes out, toothpick comes out clean out of the center, somewhere around 25 to 30 minutes. Once you take it out, again, you can teach the kids it's hot. You're going to use your oven mitts and let it cool on the rack for at least 15 minutes before cutting. So you could see these recipes are fully modified for you already. You don't have to change anything unless you wanted to. Other recipes, you can look at a boxed recipe and modify it the way you want with some of the suggestions I talked about. So I hope I didn't talk too fast or go through everything too fast, but with that, I want to open it up with any questions, or tell us about, something that might help or work for you. And, the holidays are coming up. We've talked about making changes and getting picky eaters to try things. Probably around the holidays isn't the time to make your kids try new things. You can suggest an offer, but don't stress out, especially around the holidays, if they're not willing to try something just yet.